I'm Ashley Morgan, 32 female. I live in a small, quiet apartment filled with books and historical maps, a peaceful contrast to the chaotic family I was born into. My work as a museum archivist is my sanctuary, a place where history is neatly cataloged and the truth, however old, is preserved in ink and paper. But the truth in my own family was about to detonate a carefully constructed lie that had spanned more than 3 decades, all thanks to one final, cruel act from my deceased father. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The air in Mr. Peterson's office was thick with the scent of old leather and fresh grief. It had been a week since my father, Dr. David Morgan, a man whose hands were as skilled at surgery as they were at inflicting emotional wounds, had passed away from a sudden heart attack. My mother, Diane, sat perfectly composed in a plush armchair, her grief as curated as the charity galas she organized. My older sister, Jessica, sat beside her, occasionally dabbing a tearless eye with a silk handkerchief, a gesture I was certain she'd practiced for her next mournful social media post. And then there was me, feeling like an outsider, a role I had played for as long as I could remember. Mr. Peterson, my father's lawyer for over 40 years, cleared his throat. He was a kind man with weary eyes who had seen our family through every major event, good and bad. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice a gentle rumble. David was a very precise man. His will reflects that. He left specific instructions on how this reading was to be conducted. My mother nodded regally, as if expecting to be crowned the queen of his vast estate. Jessica gave my hand a squeeze that felt more like a warning than a comfort. She had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our father's eyes. A successful social media influencer with over 1 million followers, she embodied the modern glamour and public success he admired. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, academic one. My passion for history and dusty archives was something my father openly called a frivolous hobby, not a career. He wanted a daughter who was a reflection of his own ambition, and Jessica played that part beautifully. I was a disappointment he never bothered to hide. Mr. Peterson began reading through the standard bequests. My mother was to receive the primary residence, a substantial stock portfolio, and a lifelong stipend that would ensure she could continue her charitable endeavors without financial concern. Jessica was bequeathed the family's luxury vacation home in the mountains and a trust fund that would make her financially independent for life. I held my breath, expecting my own mention to be a footnote, perhaps a small sum to acknowledge my existence. "And now," Mr. Peterson said, pausing to adjust his glasses, "we come to the portion concerning Ashley." He looked at me with an expression of genuine pity, and my stomach twisted into a cold knot. David's instructions here are unconventional. He took a deep breath. To his daughter, Ashley Morgan, he bequeaths the remainder of his estate, including his investment properties, his art collection, and controlling shares in his medical technology company, valued at approximately $12 million. A collective gasp filled the room. Jessica's perfectly manicured hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. My mother stared at the lawyer as if he'd just spoken in a foreign language. I was speechless. It made no sense. This was a man who once told me that my university degree in history was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Why would he leave me the bulk of his fortune? Mr. Peterson held up a hand to quell the rising tension. "However," he continued, his voice dropping, "this inheritance is contingent upon a specific condition." He read directly from the will, his voice adopting the cold, clinical tone I knew so well as my father's. "This bequest is conditional upon Ashley Morgan providing scientific, irrefutable proof of her paternity. She must submit to a DNA test, administered by an independent lab, to confirm that she is, in fact, my biological daughter. Only upon receiving a certified report confirming a 99.9% paternal match will the assets be transferred to her name." The silence that followed was deafening. It was a slap in the face from beyond the grave. It wasn't just a condition, it was a public declaration of his doubt. He hadn't just disdained my life choices, he had questioned my very identity, my place in the family. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. My mother was the first to speak, her voice a horrify. Ed whisper, "David, why would he do such a thing? It's monstrous." But there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite decipher. Fear. Jessica, however, recovered quickly. Her shock morphed into a smug, pitying smile. "Oh, Ashley, honey," she cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Don't you worry, it's just a formality. Daddy was always so thorough. We all know you're his, you have his serious eyes." She patted my arm, her touch feeling like a brand. It was a performance, and it was for my mother's benefit, but I knew what she was really thinking. She was the one who was supposed to inherit everything. This was just a bizarre, temporary hurdle before the fortune was rightfully redirected to her. The will stated that if the condition wasn't met, the inheritance would default to her. Of course it would. Mr. Peterson explained the logistics. A reputable lab had been designated. I would need to provide a sample, and my father's DNA was already on file from a previous medical procedure. The results would take 2 to 3 weeks. "I'm sorry, Ashley," he said softly, after my mother and sister had swept out of the office in a cloud of expensive perfume and whispered indignation. "Your father was a complicated man." I just nodded, unable to speak. I walked out of that building feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. The money didn't matter. What mattered was the chilling, posthumous message my father had sent me: "You were never truly one of us." I agreed to the test, not for the inheritance, but to prove him wrong one last time. I wanted to stand on his grave, hold up the results, and tell him that despite his cruelty, I was his daughter. I had no idea that the truth I was about to uncover was far more complicated and devastating than my father's simple, spiteful doubt. The results wouldn't just prove who I was, they would destroy the very foundation of the family I thought I knew. In the 2 weeks that followed the will reading, my life felt like it was suspended in a state of surreal animation. I went through the motions, going to work, cataloging artifacts, eating, sleeping, but my mind was constantly replaying the scene in Mr. Peterson's office. The weight of my father's final insult settled deep in my bones. It was a unique kind of pain to be so thoroughly rejected by a parent even after they were gone. The DNA test was scheduled, a simple cheek swab at a sterile, impersonal clinic. The process was quick and clinical, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos it had unleashed within me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, my very existence being questioned and analyzed. My mother, Diane, called me every day. Her calls were a strange mix of feigned maternal concern and thinly veiled anxiety. "Have you heard anything yet, darling?" she would ask, her voice a little too bright. "I just can't bear to think of what your father has put you through. It's a disgrace." But her words felt hollow, rehearsed. She never asked how I was feeling, she only asked about the results. It was as if she was waiting for a storm to pass, hoping it wouldn't damage her perfectly constructed life. I started to notice a tension in her voice that hadn't been there before, a nervous energy that made me uneasy. The real torment, however, came from Jessica. My sister, the self-proclaimed queen of authenticity and positive vibes, had apparently decided that my humiliation was prime content for her devoted followers. She didn't mention me by name, of course. She was far too clever for that. Instead, she started a series of posts and videos about navigating complex family dynamics and healing from generational trauma. In one video, she sat in her pristine white living room, a single, perfect tear rolling down her cheek. "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can hurt you in ways you never imagined," she said, her voice trembling artfully. "It's so important to protect your peace and know your worth, even when family challenges your very identity." Her followers lapped it up. The comments were a flood of sympathy and praise. "You're so brave, Jess. Thank you for being so vulnerable, sending you love and light during this difficult time." She was positioning herself as the victim, the graceful daughter dealing with the fallout of a difficult family secret. She was monetizing my pain, turning my father's cruelty into a brand-building opportunity. Each post felt like a fresh stab. She spoke of the importance of blood ties and how true family always shines through, a not-so-subtle implication that my own ties were in question. One evening, she called me. It wasn't to offer support. "Hey, Ash," she said, her voice casual. "Mom told me you did the test. So brave of you." I could hear the smirk in her voice. "I just wanted to check in. You know, once this is all over and things are settled, I want you to know that there's no pressure. You don't have to feel awkward." About it. "Awkward about what, Jessica?" I asked, my voice flat. "Well, you know," she said, sighing dramatically. "The money. Once it defaults to me, it's a huge responsibility, and I know it must be disappointing for you, but I'll make sure you're taken care of. I was thinking of setting up a small trust for you, something to help you with your little museum job." The condescension was breathtaking. She had already decided the outcome. In her mind, I was not my father's daughter, and the fortune was already hers. She wasn't just waiting for the results, she was celebrating a victory that hadn't even happened yet. "The results haven't come back yet," I said, my hand tightening around the phone. "Oh, I know, sweetie, but we have to be realistic, don't we? Daddy wouldn't have put that clause in the will without a reason. He must have known something, or suspected at least." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Between you and me, I think he was trying to protect the family legacy. You know how important our name was to him." That was it. That was the moment my simmering anger boiled over into cold, hard rage. It wasn't about the money. It was about her utter lack of empathy, her gleeful anticipation of my downfall. She saw this not as a family tragedy, but as her coronation. She, the perfect daughter, was finally getting what she deserved, while I, the pretender, was about to be cast out. "My little museum job pays my bills, Jessica," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "And it's taught me one thing: history has a way of revealing the truth, no matter how long it's been buried. You might want to remember that." I hung up before she could respond. The conversation left me shaking. Her cruelty was so casual, so profound. She wasn't just my sister, she was my rival, and she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. She believed she was entitled to our father's legacy, and she was already planning how she would manage it. And me, once I was officially proven to be an imposter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, and I felt an unfamiliar resolve hardening within me. My father's will was meant to be his final act of control, a way to humiliate me from the grave. Jessica was using it as a weapon to solidify her own status as the chosen one. They both expected me to crumble. They expected me to be a quiet, sad footnote in the Morgan family history, but they had underestimated me. I was an archivist. I spent my days sifting through forgotten documents, piecing together narratives from fragments of the past. My father had inadvertently handed me a puzzle. And as I waited for that envelope from the lab, I promised myself that no matter what it said, I would be the one to solve it. The truth was coming, and I had a feeling it was going to be far more damaging to them than it ever could be to me. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks and a day after the will reading. The subject line was stark and clinical: "Paternity test results, case M78B4. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. The digital envelope that held the answer to the question that had haunted me for weeks. My finger hovered over the mouse, a wave of nausea washing over me. Part of me didn't want to know. It was easier to live with the doubt than to face a truth that could erase my identity. But the memory of Jessica's smug voice and my mother's anxious calls pushed me forward. I clicked it open. The report was a simple PDF, filled with scientific jargon, percentages, and genetic markers. I scrolled past the technical data, my eyes searching for the conclusion. And then I saw it at the bottom of the page in bold, unequivocal text. Conclusion: the alleged father, David Morgan, is confirmed as the biological father of the subject, Ashley Morgan. The probability of paternity is 99.9998%. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled me in my chair washed over me. I laughed, a raw, choked sound. I was his daughter. My father's last, cruel attempt to disown me had failed. I had the proof. I could finally put this whole humiliating ordeal behind me. My first instinct was to call Mr. Peterson, to forward him the report and claim what was rightfully mine. I imagined the look on Jessica's face, the forced smile she would have to plaster on as she congratulated me. The thought was deeply satisfying. I saved the PDF to my desktop and was about to close the email when I noticed something. There was a second attachment. It was labeled Supplemental Report Familial Markers. I hadn't even seen it before, my focus so intent on finding the main conclusion. Curiosity piqued, I clicked it open. This report was different. It seemed to be a more detailed breakdown of the DNA comparison, not just between me and my father, but including a reference sample. The reference sample was labeled Subject B Sibling. My blood ran cold. I realized the lab must have used Jessica's DNA as a reference point as well. My father, in his meticulous cruelty, must have requested a full familial comparison to ensure there were no ambiguities. I read through the text, my eyes scanning the complex data. Most of it was incomprehensible, a series of alleles and loci that meant nothing to me. But then I saw a summary paragraph that was written in plain English. My mind struggled to process the words. The analysis confirms that Ashley Morgan and David Morgan share the required genetic markers for a father-daughter relationship. However, when comparing the profiles of Ashley Morgan and the sibling reference, Jessica Morgan, a significant discrepancy was found. While they share a maternal link, they do not share the same paternal genetic markers. In conclusion, Ashley Morgan and Jessica Morgan are half-siblings. They have the same mother but different biological fathers. I read the paragraph again, and again. The words blurred, the screen swam before my eyes. It didn't make sense, it was impossible. My father, the revered surgeon, the man who demanded perfection and lineage, the man who put me through this ordeal to prove I was his, was not Jessica's father. Jessica, the golden child, the perfect daughter, the one who looked so much like him, who acted so much like him. My father's final, spiteful act had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He had set a trap for me, but it was my sister, his perfect, beloved daughter, who had been caught in it. The initial shock gave way to a dizzying rush of emotions. There was a strange, dark vindication. The irony was almost too much to bear. All my life, I had been made to feel like the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit. And all along, it was Jessica who was the outlier. It recontextualized everything. My father's obsessive doting on her, his constant need to praise her and lift her up. Was it genuine paternal pride? Or was it a desperate, lifelong attempt to convince himself that she was his? Had he known? Or had he merely suspected? And was this DNA test a final, desperate attempt to confirm his own lineage through me, the child he had no doubts about? Then my thoughts turned to my mother. Diane, with her perfect composure and her panicked phone calls. Her anxiety suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. She wasn't worried about my feelings. She was terrified that this test would uncover her secret. She must have known. She had lived with this lie for 35 years. Her entire life, her standing in the community, her marriage to a respected and powerful man, it was all built on a foundation of deceit. I leaned back in my chair, the two PDFs open on my screen, two documents that had completely rewritten my family's history. The first one was my shield, the proof of my identity. The second one was my sword. My father had intended the will to be an instrument of humiliation for me, but he had unknowingly given me the instrument of his own revenge against the wife who had betrayed him and the daughter who was not his. I didn't call Mr. Peterson. I didn't call my mother or Jessica. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment and I thought. The hurt and humiliation of the past few weeks began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Jessica's smug, condescending voice echoed in my ears. "I'll make sure you're taken care of. I was thinking of setting up a small trust for you." A bitter smile touched my lips. The roles were about to be reversed. I wasn't going to be petty or cruel. I was an archivist. I respected the truth, and the truth in its entirety was going to be revealed, but it would be on my terms and in my own time. The will reading wasn't over. There was going to be a second act, and this time I would be the one directing the show. The days following the discovery felt like living in a different reality. The world outside my apartment continued as normal, but within its walls, I was a historian excavating the ruins of my own family. The DNA report was a Rosetta Stone, and armed with its devastating translation, I began to look at the past through a new lens. My job had trained me to be meticulous, patient, and thorough. I approached my family's history with the same professional detachment I would give to a collection of forgotten letters, searching for corroborating evidence for the cracks in the official narrative. My first step was to examine old family photographs, not for the happy memories they were supposed to represent, but for the subtle clues I might have missed. I pulled out dusty albums, my parents' wedding photos, pictures of Jessica's first birthday, my own christening. In picture after picture, I saw the same story, my father, David, beaming at Jessica, holding her aloft as if she were a trophy. His pride was so immense, so performative. With me, his smiles were more reserved, his posture stiffer. Everyone had always said Jessica was the spitting image of him, same sharp jawline, same confident smile. But now, looking closer, I saw it was an illusion. Her features were similar, but not identical. The resemblance was in her mannerisms, the way she carried herself, things a child learns and mimics. The physical truth was far less convincing now that I knew what to look for. My investigation then turned to my mother. I needed to understand the when and who of her secret. This felt like the greatest betrayal of all. Who was this other man? Was it a fleeting affair or something more? I started with my mother's life before and shortly after she married my father. She was a nurse when they met. He was a brilliant and ambitious surgical resident. Theirs was hailed as a storybook romance. He was the handsome, driven doctor. She was the beautiful, supportive woman who gave up her career to raise a family and manage his home. I went to the public library archives, my own professional territory, and began searching through old newspapers and social registers from the year Jessica was conceived. It felt ghoulish, like I was spying on my own family's past. I focused on the social events my parents would have attended, hospital fundraisers, charity balls, society dinners. My mother, Diane Morgan, was often mentioned, always on the arm of my father. But as I sifted through the photos and captions, one name started to appear with surprising frequency. A man named Julian Croft. He was a visiting surgeon from Europe, a charismatic and handsome man who worked at my father's hospital for a one-year fellowship. There were photos of him at the same events as my parents. In one, he was laughing with my mother, his hand resting on her arm in a way that was just a little too familiar. My father stood slightly to the side, his expression unreadable. In another, a caption mentioned Dr. Croft's departure at the end of his fellowship, just a few months before my mother would have realized she was pregnant with Jessica. The timeline was razor-thin, but it was there. Julian Croft was a ghost, a man who had swept into their lives and then disappeared. An online search revealed he had returned to France, become a renowned pediatric surgeon, and had a family of his own. He passed away 5 years ago. He was a dead end, but he was also a tangible piece of the puzzle. The final and most difficult part of my investigation was confronting my own memories. I thought back to my childhood, searching for moments of discord, for slips of the tongue, for anything that hinted at the truth. I remembered the arguments. They were rare, but when they happened, they were volcanic. My father would get a certain look in his eyes, a mixture of fury and a deep, wounded pride. I recalled one fight in particular. I was about 10 years old. My father had come home late, and I overheard him yelling at my mother in their bedroom. His words were muffled, but I heard one phrase clearly. "Do you think I'm a fool, Diane? Do you take me for a complete fool?" My mother had been crying, her voice a desperate whisper. The next day, everything was back to normal, the tension glossed over with strained politeness. At the time, I assumed it was about money or work. Now, I wondered if it was something far more fundamental. Had my father known, or had he just suspected? The clause in the will was his final, desperate gambit. He couldn't accuse my mother without destroying his own reputation and the perfect family image he had curated for decades. He couldn't confront Jessica without shattering her world. So he aimed his suspicion at me, the one he already felt disconnected from. He must have thought that if I was his, then by extension, Jessica must be too. It was a flawed, cruel logic, but it was the only way he could seek an answer without blowing up his own legacy while he was alive. He had weaponized his will to get the one truth he couldn't bring himself to ask for. Armed with a timeline, a name, and a lifetime of reevaluated memories, I felt ready. The quiet archivist had become a private investigator of her own life. The story was no longer just about a DNA result. It was about a web of lies that had ensnared everyone. My mother's betrayal, my father's silent suspicion, Jessica's unearned status, and my own lifetime of feeling like a second-class citizen in my own home. It was all connected. I saved all my findings, the digital copies of the photos, the newspaper clippings, the timeline I had meticulously constructed. I sent the first DNA report, the one confirming my paternity, to Mr. Peterson. I simply wrote, "Please find the attached report as per the will's instructions. I will be in touch shortly regarding the transfer of assets." I deliberately omitted the second report. That one was not for the lawyer. It was for my family. The stage was set. The evidence was collected. Now, all that was left was the performance, and I knew exactly where and when it was going to take place. With the official confirmation of my paternity sent to Mr. Peterson, the legal wheels began to turn. He called me to congratulate me, his voice filled with genuine relief. "I'm so glad, Ashley," he said. "I never for a moment doubted it, but I'm pleased we can put this unpleasantness to rest. The asset transfer process will begin immediately. It will take a few weeks to finalize everything." "Actually, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice calm and steady, "I'd like to put a hold on that. There are some unresolved family matters. I'd like to request a final meeting in your office with my mother and sister present. Think of it as a supplementary will reading." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A meeting? Is everything all right, Ashley?" "Everything will be," I replied. "Let's schedule it for next Friday. That should give everyone enough time to prepare." He agreed, albeit with a hint of confusion in his voice. The moment I hung up, I began my preparations. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst or a screaming match. My father was a man of precision and logic. My mother and sister thrived on drama and public perception. I would meet them on a field of my own choosing, one of cold, hard facts. For the next week, I operated like a director preparing for opening night. My first call was to my mother. "Mom," I said, my tone neutral, "Mr. Peterson is hosting a final meeting next Friday to go over the details of the inheritance. He needs you and Jessica to be there to sign some final papers." "Oh, of course, darling," she said, relief flooding her voice. She thought it was over. "The results came back then. Everything is fine." "Everything is as it should be," I said, choosing my words carefully. It wasn't a lie. My next call was to Jessica. She answered on the third ring, her voice clipped. "Ashley, I assume you're calling to gloat." "Not at all," I said smoothly. "I'm calling to invite you to a final meeting at Mr. Peterson's office on Friday. He needs us all there to finalize the estate." She was silent for a moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the disappointment warring with her need to maintain a graceful facade. "Fine," she finally bit out. "I'll be there. I suppose congratulations are in order. You must be thrilled." "I'm just glad the truth is out," I replied, letting the ambiguity of the statement hang in the air. With the meeting set, I prepared my presentation. I created a simple, elegant folder for each of them. I wasn't going to be theatrical, but I wanted the evidence to be undeniable. Inside each folder, I placed 3 documents, carefully arranged. The first was a copy of the supplemental DNA report, the one that showed Jessica and I were half-sisters. I highlighted the concluding paragraph in yellow. The second document was a printout of the timeline I had created, showing Dr. Julian Croft's fellowship at the hospital, cross-referenced with the conception date for Jessica. The third and final document was a collection of 3 photographs I had scanned from the old albums. The one of my mother laughing with Dr. Croft, another of my father looking on with that strange, wounded expression, and a side-by-side comparison of Dr. Croft's professional headshot next to a recent photo of Jessica. The resemblance, once you knew to look for it, was uncanny. They had the same eyes. I spent the rest of the week in a state of calm resolve. I went to work, immersing myself in the quiet order of the archives. The history of strangers was a comfort, a reminder that stories of secrets and lies were as old as time itself. My own story was just one of many, but it was mine to conclude. There was no rage left in me, only a profound sense of purpose. My father's will had been a test, but not the one he intended. It was a test of my character. Would I crumble under the humiliation? Would I lash out in anger? Or would I handle the truth with the dignity and precision that he, in his own twisted way, had always valued? The night before the meeting, I sat in my apartment and looked around at the life I had built for myself, a life completely separate from the Morgan family's drama and wealth. I had my career, my friends, my quiet independence. The $12 million was a staggering sum, but at that moment, it felt secondary. What I was about to claim was far more valuable than money. I was claiming my own narrative. I was taking the story they had written for me, the story of the disappointing, second-best daughter, and I was editing it with the red ink of truth. I slept soundly that night for the first time in weeks. I was not nervous. I was not afraid. I was an archivist, and I was simply going to present the historical record. The fallout would be theirs to manage. The humiliation would be theirs to bear. My father, in his quest for a truth he couldn't face, had given me the power to declassify the most guarded secret of the Morgan family. And tomorrow, in that stuffy, their bound office, I was going to publish it. The atmosphere in Mr. Peterson's office was a stark contrast to the first meeting. The air of feigned grief was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. My mother and Jessica sat on one side of the large mahogany table, a united front of strained smiles and expensive outfits. Jessica was scrolling through her phone, probably checking the engagement on her latest post about rising above family negativity. My mother kept smoothing down her already perfect silk blouse, her movements sharp and anxious. I sat opposite them, a single file folder resting on the table in front of me. Mr. Peterson sat at the head, looking uneasy, clearly sensing that this was more than a simple signing of papers. "Thank you for coming," he began, shuffling some documents. "As you know, Ashley has met the conditions of the will. We're here today to finalize the transfer of assets and—" "Before we do that," I interrupted, my voice clear and calm. It commanded the attention of the room. Both my mother and sister looked up, surprised by my assertiveness. "I believe there are a few details from the report that we need to discuss as a family." Jessica scoffed, a small, ugly sound. "What more is there to discuss? You won, you're getting the money. Just sign the papers so we can all get on with our lives." "This isn't about the money, Jessica," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "This is about the truth. Dad wanted the truth, after all. That's why he put us all through this, isn't it?" I slid 2 folders across the table, one in front of my mother, one in front of Jessica. "I believe these belong to you." My mother stared at the folder as if it were a snake. Jessica, however, opened hers with a flick of her wrist, her expression one of bored annoyance. Her eyes scanned the first page, the highlighted DNA report. I watched as the color drained from her face. Her perfect, influencer-trained composure shattered into a million pieces. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked from the paper to me, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. My mother, seeing Jessica's reaction, fumbled to open her own folder. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely lift the page. She read the conclusion, and a low, guttural moan escaped her lips. She slumped back in her chair, her face a mask of utter devastation. The secret she had protected for 35 years was lying exposed on the polished surface of the table. What is this?" Jessica finally stammered, her voice a hoarse whisper. "This is a joke, it's fake." "It's the supplemental report from the same accredited lab," I said evenly. Dad didn't just test my paternity. In his thoroughness, he requested a full familial comparison. He wanted to be absolutely sure, and now we are. We have the same mother, Jessica, but we do not have the same father. I gave them a moment to let the words sink in before I continued. Turn the page. Jessica's trembling fingers flipped to the timeline. She saw the name, Julian Croft. She saw the dates. My mother didn't need to look. She knew the name. She knew the dates. She just stared at me, her eyes pleading. And the last page, I said, my voice softening slightly. This was the final, undeniable blow. Jessica turned to the photographs. She saw the picture of her mother with Julian Croft. She saw her own face next to his. The resemblance was absolute. It was in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile. It was a truth that couldn't be denied or spun for social media. She wasn't a Morgan by blood. She was a Croft. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my mother's quiet, ragged sobs. Jessica just stared at the picture of the man who was her biological father, her expression a chaotic mix of confusion, betrayal, and profound loss. The identity she had built her entire life upon, the legacy she felt so entitled to, had been a lie. Mr. Peterson, who had been watching this unfold with stunned bewilderment, finally spoke. Ashley, I don't understand. My father suspected, I explained, turning to him. I think he suspected for a very long time. He couldn't bring himself to confront it, so he devised this cruel test for me, hoping it would settle his own doubts. He never imagined what it would truly uncover. I looked back at my mother. Did he, Mom, did he ever ask you? My mother shook her head, tears streaming down her face. We had a fight years ago, she whispered. He asked me if there was anything I needed to tell him. I denied it. I swore to him. I was so scared. I've been scared every day since. Jessica finally found her voice, and it was filled with a venom I had never heard before. She wasn't speaking to me. She was looking at our mother. You lied, she hissed. My whole life. You let me believe. You let him believe. How could you? I loved your father, my mother cried, her defense weak and pathetic. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was going to tell him, but then I found out I was pregnant, and I was a coward. A coward? Jessica's laughter was hysterical. You're not a coward, you're a monster. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She didn't look at me as she walked out. She didn't look at anyone. She just fled, leaving her folder, her entire stolen history, behind her on the table. My mother remained, weeping into her hands. Mr. Peterson, to his credit, looked on with sympathy, but he said nothing. The room was heavy with the wreckage of a family. I stood up. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice firm again. As the sole-confirmed biological heir of David Morgan, I want to make some amendments to my inheritance. My mother looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide with fear. She probably thought I was going to cut her off, to leave her with nothing. I want to establish a trust, I continued, for the education and welfare of any children Jessica may have. They are, after all, my nieces or nephews. They are innocent in all of this. I paused. As for the rest, I will be taking full control of the estate as my father intended. The Morgan legacy, it turns out, is mine to manage. I left my mother sobbing in that office. As I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. I felt quiet. The storm had passed. The truth had been told. The final reading was over, and for the first time in my life, I was free. The aftermath of that meeting was not a sudden, explosive event, but a slow, quiet unraveling. The shockwaves rippled through what was left of our family, altering the landscape forever. Jessica disappeared for 2 weeks. Her social media went dark. Her 1 million followers were left with a final, cheerful post about her favorite brand of matcha tea, a ghost from a life that no longer existed. When she finally resurfaced, it was through a lawyer. She sent a formal notice that she was legally changing her last name. She didn't change it to Croft. She chose a new name entirely, severing ties with both the man who had raised her and the man who had fathered her. She wanted a complete reinvention, a life scrubbed clean of the Morgan lie. I heard through Mr. Peterson that she sold her condo and moved to the other side of the country. We haven't spoken since, and I don't know if we ever will. The trust I established for her future children remains untouched, a silent testament to a sisterhood that was broken by a secret it never knew it held. My mother, Diane, was a different story. The destruction of her perfect life sent her into a deep depression. Her friends from the charity boards, who had once flocked to her side, slowly drifted away as whispers of the scandal began to circulate. The Morgan name, once a symbol of prestige, was now tainted by gossip. Without my father's power and with her own credibility shattered, she became a social pariah. She sold the large family home, unable to bear the weight of its memories and ghosts. She moved into a small, tasteful condominium, a place with no history. Our relationship is complicated. She called me about a month after the meeting. She didn't apologize, not directly. Apologies were not in my mother's nature. Instead, she talked about the past, about her loneliness as a young wife, about my father's demanding career, about the fleeting attention she received from a charismatic visitor. They weren't excuses, but they were the closest she could come to an explanation. For the first time, I saw her not as a monster, but as a flawed, frightened woman who had made a catastrophic mistake and spent a lifetime trying to outrun it. We speak occasionally now. The calls are awkward and filled with long silences. There may not be forgiveness, but there is a fragile, tentative understanding. The anger I held for her has mostly faded, replaced by a quiet, weary pity. As for me, my life changed in ways I never expected. Taking control of my father's estate was a monumental task. I didn't want to run a medical tech company, so with the board's approval, I promoted a talented executive from within to the CEO position and took a seat as the chairperson. My role is strategic, not operational, leaving me free to continue my work at the museum. The archives are still my sanctuary. The wealth has not changed who I am, but it has changed what I can do. I used a significant portion of the inheritance to establish the David and Ashley Morgan Foundation for Historical Preservation. It felt like the perfect synthesis of his legacy and my passion. We fund under-resourced museums, digitize fragile historical documents, and provide grants for young academics, the kind of frivolous work my father once mocked. It is my way of honoring the part of him that was my father, while using his resources to support the world he never understood. It's a quiet, private irony that brings me a sense of peace. Sometimes I visit my father's grave. The polished granite stone is simple. Dr. David Morgan, beloved husband and father. I often wonder what he would think if he knew the full truth his will had unearthed. Would he be horrified? Vindicated? Would he feel regret for the pain he caused me, or only for his own blindness? I don't hate him anymore. In a twisted, painful way, his final act set me free. He forced a reckoning that, while devastating, ultimately allowed the truth to surface. He gave me the tools to dismantle the very facade he spent his life building. My inheritance wasn't just the money, the properties, or the stocks. My true inheritance was the truth of who I am and who I am not. I am Ashley Morgan, daughter of David Morgan. I am an archivist, a chairperson, a quiet woman who found her strength not in a bloodline, but in a library. My family, as I knew it, is gone. It was a beautiful, carefully constructed lie. In its place is something smaller, quieter, and more honest. And in the end, that is a legacy worth more than any fortune.